All right, gonna give a minute here for people to start joining. But this will be a intro to Fusion 360 for Shapeoko 3, Shapeoko and Nomad users group. Go over some basics of CAD and CAM in Fusion 360. Looks like at least one person's joined. Facebook isn't really good at showing me who's joined, so I'm going to wait just a minute here and let some people join. Hopefully you guys can see my desktop. Got Fusion 360 open with just a blank document. Give it just another minute here. If there's anything specific you guys want to see, just type it in the chat. Feel free to ask questions or slow me down if I go too fast. Just to give some background on myself while we wait, I've been using Fusion 360 for a little over a year now. Mostly use it for 3D printing. If I go into my general here, a lot of parts and pieces for 3D printers or 3D printer projects. The most complex thing that I've been involved in is actually designing a 3D printer in Fusion 360. All the parts and pieces and everything completely from the ground up were done in Fusion 360. So I have used it at a fairly advanced level, but the CAD side is fairly new to me, and the workflow for CAD is definitely a little different than for 3D printing when you're designing for a Shapeoko. So switch back over here to my main general folder. I got a CNC folder here. Looks like we got a couple people watching. So again, if you have any questions, I have two monitors. I have the comments up on the one monitor, so I can watch what you guys are saying. Hopefully, you guys can hear me. Just ask in the chat if everyone can hear me, and once I get a little feedback on that, we can get started. Okay, good. Somebody can. Okay, so I just did this project yesterday. It's very quick and easy, but I thought it'd be a good starter. And then if we have time, we'll go ahead and do something like a basic sign to give you guys a workflow for that as well. So the project I did yesterday was I decided to make my first box, top and bottom enclosures that fit together. I have a piece of poplar I picked up at Lowe's, nice cheap piece of wood. So my first thought was it's 3.5 inch wide, 3/4 inch thick, and like 15-inch long piece of poplar. So that's the project I had in mind. When you're in Fusion 360, when you start in, if it's not already set to it, you can set the document settings to whichever is more comfortable for you. For 3D printing, I work only in millimeters. For CNC, sometimes inches is better. The nice thing is it really doesn't matter for the most part, because you can do things and it'll actually do the math for you. So I put in the Facebook group today that the primary mantra for Fusion 360 should be this. Let me back up here. A lot of times the first introductions will say, let's go make a box. You never want to use this create shape, other than maybe coil, because it's hard to make a coil without using that. But let's face it, how often are we making coils with CNC? So really, you want to start with a sketch. And so we're going to sketch our box here, and you just choose a plane. It really doesn't matter what plane you choose. And it'll switch you into sketch mode. So once you're in sketch mode, the sketch palette comes up and it creates a sketches folder. And you just draw a shape. And since we're making a box, I'll draw a square. So first thing to note is I didn't care what size. When you start drawing, it'll come up with those numbers there. I don't even pay attention to those. I just draw the shape I want. Because the second thing in the mantra to do is to constrain. So what constrain means is I clicked on this dimension tool. It's kind of buried in the menu there. It's down here. You can also hit D. When you click the dimension tool, I can click on this top line and then click on this bottom line, and it comes up with this floating number with arrows. If I just click somewhere, it'll say how far apart I want those two things to be. Well, I know my poplar's 3.5 inches wide, so I want my box to be 3.25 inches on the side. I'm going to do the same thing this way, and 3.25. And I've now constrained that box to that size. One interesting thing about the constraint tool, sometimes it can seem kind of a mystery as to why it'll move one way or the other, like the left side of this jump towards the right. Whichever side you click first is the one that's going to move. So if I do it this way, 3.25, and it made me a liar. It should be that way. It's supposed to do it that way, but for whatever reason it didn't. Anyway, so I have a 3.25 inch box here that I've sketched. So sketch, constrain, and the third step of everything I do is extrude. So I'm going to extrude it 0.75 inches, and extrude just means make it 3D. Now I have a 3D box. If I click my home view here, that represents my box. Now I don't like that it's sitting upright. It's a personal preference. So if I click on that, I can, let me do it this way. Click on the body. I can go to modify. I never use it this way. I really don't know where that is. Huh. I just want to move, so you can right click on it on the object here and say move. So I'm just going to lay that down flat. It doesn't matter which way I go with it. So there we go. I have a 3/4 inch tall, 3.25 inch wide box. Everything makes sense so far? Hopefully. So this is going to be my little jewelry box or whatever I'm going to make. Now, if I wanted to do a simple cut in it, let's say I wanted to, I wasn't making a box, I was making some sort of tool for my CNC. I hit sketch a line, click on the side you want to sketch on, back up here. So here I'm in the 3D view, not in sketch mode. I can sketch choose a plane, draw a line. It's the same process again. Sketch, constrain. Now, notice that line isn't quite straight, and I would like it to be. So in my sketch palette here, I can constrain with this list of things and say make this line perpendicular to this line, and it'll straighten it up for me. So dimension is one constraint. Oops, if I can click right. All of these things here are constraints. So I can say I want that line 1 inch off of this side. I want another line here, 1 inch off of this side. That was weird. I've never seen it do that before. That's funny. Oh, it's 1 degree. Okay, I need to make it perpendicular. That was really funny. I don't know why it jumped way down there like that. Now it's parallel. Now if I do my dimensions, I can say 1 inch off of that side. So now I have 2 lines 1 inch off of the side, and I can extrude that. Maybe I wanted to make something that stuck out of a part, or I want to cut into the part. So it's the same process over again. Sketch, constrain, extrude, and you can do that with any shape. You could make a circle inside of a plane, sketch it. You can constrain it in whatever way. You know, say I want it to be the center point to the edge 1.5 inches, and move things around that way. I don't want to get into too much detail of what all the constraints are, but they're really, really powerful. All of these constraints here in this menu are very powerful. And some constraints are automatic. If I make a second circle and click on that one, it auto constrains it, makes them concentric for me. This right here is a concentric constraint. I don't know if you guys can see that little blue circle there. And then, so now that those are constrained, I might, extrude this one down 1/10 of an inch, and my sketch turned off there. So I just need to turn the sketch on. And actually did that first one I typoed. I said 1/10 of an inch. Show you something kind of cool here. Let me delete this, because this is one I use all the time. So I have this shape here, and I want to extrude it. I could tell it how many inches to go. You can also do an extrude to. So I chose to object. I'm going to pan around and go right to the bottom, and I just cut a hole through that. So that's, again, sketch, constrain, which just means move around and dimension things how you want using some absolute tools, and then extrude it. And you can make pretty much any shape doing that. So I'm just rolling my timeline back here, back to where I had just a box. So here's my base box again. I'm going to cut out of this piece of poplar I have. What I decided I wanted to do is I wanted to make a line that represented the midpoint of the poplar to make the 2 halves of the box, the top half and bottom half. So I just sketched the line across. Pretty straightforward. That line, you can see this little triangle. The triangle means midpoint. So it is constrained to the midpoint. And I'm going to constrain it, just make sure we're perpendicular, and it already is because it's at the midpoint on both sides. So I've now drawn a line that divides my box in 2. Now I'm going to use split body. Actually, before I do that, let's do this. So I don't want my box to be all square. So let's select the 4 corners. I'm just hitting Control to select all 4 corners. I'm going to say Modify Fillet. I love fillets. It's a great little tool. It lets you just, oh, I didn't get all 4 corners selected. I clicked on the edges, and why is it not letting me collect those? It is not letting me select these front two. There we go. Okay. Fusion's being funny with me tonight. It knows I'm showing people what I'm doing. So I've selected all 4 corners now, and then you just drag that in to round off your corners. So I'm going to have a nice rounded box shape here. And I'm going to round it off a 1/2 inch and say OK. Now this line I drew earlier, let's go back, and your timeline is down here at the bottom. It's handy to be able to go back, and you can say Edit Sketch. I want to take that line, so I click on that line, and I want to make it so it is a construction line. It's my top option in my palette. What a construction line means is it's something I'm going to use as a reference point, but I'm not really going to use as an object, or draw like a square or circle or whatever around it. I don't want it to divide up my object. So now if I click on this, and I were to sketch on that plane, that line is kind of ignored, but I can still reference it. And what I want to reference it for is I'm going to go to Modify and Split Body. I'm going to choose that body because it's the only one I have. And I'm going to choose, let me do it, no, cancel. Select that. Now it's not letting me choose that line. Okay, I thought I needed to make that line a reference line. Maybe not. No problem. Okay, I undid the construction line, and I'm going to go now to Modify Split Body. Choose that body, choose that line. There we go. And that's going to just let me chop that object in half. So now I have 2 bodies in my view, body 1 and body 2. If you click the light bulb beside something, it'll hide it. So I can hide part of my object, or all of it, bring it back. So I want to hide the top one for now. I'm going to do another sketch. I'm going to sketch on this face. Now I need to make a lip for the box so the top and bottom half fit together, and I need to clear out part of the box. So there's a really handy sketch thing that I've been using a lot more with CAD than I ever did with 3D printing, and that's the offset. So if you look in your sketch menu here, you have this offset option, and it's super handy. So I'm going to click the outside line of the top of my body, and it gives me this offset thing. And I can go, I want to do negative 0.125, or 1/8 of an inch in from the outside, and draw a line. And then I want to do the same thing again. I want to do another offset, and I want to say right here, and negative 0.125. Please, if I'm going too fast, if something's not making sense, let me know in the comments, and I can slow down. I can answer questions. I'll do it off of this one. So I've made 2 offset lines. Again, I'm just sketching lines on that top face. So sketch first. They're automatically constrained, so I have the constraints are already there. You can see it's the offset automatically constrained them for me. So now I can do an extrude. I want to bring this one up enough that it will catch the top of the box. So I'll do a 0.125. It's an eighth of an inch tall. It should be a pretty good little lip for it to catch into the top of the box. And I'll extrude this one. So I click the middle part of the sketch, and I can just drag that down. When it turns red, I'm doing a cut, or I can type in a minus. So the easiest way to do the math here, show you a cool, this is one of my favorite tricks for Fusion 360. So I click the inspect tool up here, and you can click 2 lines and see what the distance is. So it's 0.375 inches. You can see over here in the results is the distance between the 2 lines I clicked. So I can click on this, and I can say extrude. Where's my extrude? Oh, I have the inspect window open. That's why. Right click extrude, and I can say minus 0.375, which would take it all the way to the bottom, plus 0.1 or 0.125. I want to make it an eighth inch thick. So you can actually do math right in those windows and let it do the math for you. So if I hit enter on that, it's going to automatically do the math, and now this bottom of my box is going to be an eighth inch thick. So I have an eighth inch thick lip here, an eighth inch thick, eighth inch tall lip that'll extend into the top of the box, and I have this section here that goes what would it be, 0.250 or what? We can do the math. Let's see. Is that right? 0.375. Oh yeah, it would be 0.375, because yeah, I have this extending up an eighth, and this is 0.375. Sorry, I'm a little slow sometimes. So I have this 0.375 inch or 3/8 inch opening that'll be the box part. So now I'm going to unhide the first body. Make a nice little box there. I'm going to go modify, and I'm going to, oops, didn't mean to do that. I'm going to join these 2 things together. So I'm going to say combine. I want to combine body 1 and my tool body will be body 2. I'm going to do a cut, and I'm going to make sure this keep tools is selected because I don't want to get rid of that bottom box. This is a really cool, really powerful thing. I haven't found a way to do this in most other CAD programs. It's one of the things that made me love Fusion 360. So when I say OK, if I hide body 2, which is my lower box, what I just did is it cut any intersection between the 2 boxes out. So now I have that gap where the lip would fit into the upper box already made for me. So now I can just, again, let's double check. This should be 0.375. I want to extrude this. I'm going to, I know the math is negative 0.250. And now I have the top of the box at its maximum, and I have an 1/8 inch thick top there. And if I unhide the 2, they fit together nicely. Am I going way too fast? Is this making any sense at all? Not getting any feedback, so I'm hoping it's making sense. And please ask questions in the chat. So the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to take that body and flip it 180 degrees. I'll move it a little bit over to give some space between them, call it a 1/2 inch. And there we go. I have a box that's ready for CNC work. Any questions before I go into the cam side on how I did this box? And please, this is totally geared. I'm trying to gear it towards beginners. I know I'm going fast and it's a little advanced, but absolutely any question is fine. Some handy things to note, this little view up here, you can spin it around and it will spin your model for you. And you can click on any of the named sides and quickly see the different views of your model. The home button is nice because it takes you back to that default kind of isometric view. If you want to look specifically at one face of an object, say I really needed to see, one specific, I wanted to see this side panel. This is a kind of basic object to do it on, but you can click look at down here in the bottom of the pane, and it will take and center your view on whatever it is you click to look at. And just to show a little bit of why we use sketches and not create objects. So before I go into the cam side, let's say I had planned all of this around a 3.5 inch thick poplar. I cut my test box. It worked okay. I cut it last night. It did work okay, using pretty much this exact same process. I could have done a little better on it, but that's another story. But somebody brings me, sees my box, I cut out a poplar and brings me a piece of 5-inch thick or 5-inch wide oak that's 1-inch thick and says, "Hey, can you make this work for this oak?" That is a very easy thing to do in Fusion 360 if you do the sketch extrude constrain method. So my original dimension of 3.25 was set in this very first sketch. If I go back to that sketch and I set that to, say, I want to make it 4.5 inch wide box now. Oops. Hit enter. Change my original sketch from 3.25 to 4.5 and stop sketch. Yes, I have to move this second body because it's a little in the way, so I'm just going to highlight it and hit M for move on my keyboard and drag it. But I just rescaled my box to 4.5 inches instead of 3.25 inches just by going back and editing that original sketch. If I want to change the way the sides look, if I realize my offsets, I put it on my Shapeoko and I find out, oh, that 1/8 inch really didn't need to be an 1/8 inch. It could have been, it could have been 1/10 of an inch. I have that much accuracy and I want a really thin wall. Okay, that's not gonna work. But or I find out I can't cut that close of a cut, so I need to make it a 1/2 inch. You can do that, and it will just move it for you. It's interesting it didn't keep the fillet on that. That should have stayed, because I'm just changing the offset. Huh. Maybe it's because I shrunk it first. That's interesting. I don't know why it wasn't doing that. That should have kept the shape of it. But you could go in and edit that sketch. Let's see if this works. I believe I can just delete this whole offset. It's not even letting me select it all. Well, I don't want to get too far on the rabbit trail there. For something I'm not really going to do. So let's go ahead and change this back to the 3.25 that I did last night. All right, so I've got this box. It should, actually, I made a mistake here. I have a part that's going to stick up outside of my poplar. If I do an inspect and I inspect from the top to the bottom, it's going to be about a ½ inch, and it can't be that tall. Wait. No, that works. Oh, I know what I did wrong. Last night I made the box so it was the full height of the poplar. That's okay. This will give us a chance to do another operation here. So I'm going to go switch to cam unless last chance for questions on the CAD on this. We'll do another CAD project if we have time. I'll do a simple sign. Those are really quick. Move those back together. So when you're done with your construction and you're ready to do it in cam, you just switch to the cam option here in the menu, and it brings you into the cam side. And this is where Fusion really shows its strength. It's very cool for cam. I'm new to the cam side of it, but it's been very powerful so far. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a setup. Change my units to inches before I do that. So you just go to the setup menu here and you click new setup, and it's going to open this window. And on these windows, it's important to go kind of top to bottom and then through each tab. And until you get really familiar with it, I'm still learning. I go through every option on every tab and just at least read it to make sure I know what that option is doing. So the first thing we want to do is select our Z-axis and plane X-axis. It does model orientation by default. In this case, my model orientation matched what I did last night, but that may not always be the case. So if you just click that, it will start setting it for you. And to set your Z-axis, just click on whatever you think is the top of your model. It will orient it that way. If instead the top of my model was here, I can click there. You can see it switches Z around to that dimension. I want this Z, and I want to choose the X-axis. And for the X-axis, again, just choose where you want the arrow to point, click a face, and it will point at that face. So if I wanted, for whatever reason, to flip these around the other way, I could click that there, and now I have X, Y that way. So I want to do this. And then the last thing we do is set your origin. And the origin is just to say, this is where 0, 0, I'm going to zero out my Shapeoko. This is where it's going to be. Pretty critical you choose an origin, whether it's, you're going to draw an X through your stock and put it right in the center on the top. If you're going to do the bottom left corner, which is what I usually do, just, say stock box point, and click there. Model, if I only want to cut one of these, let's only do the CAD for one. It'll be a little bit easier. I'm going to click the X. I'm going to click model, and I'm going to click this one body. So now it'll ignore this other one. which is kind of handy. If I later on decide, no, I do want to do cam for both of them, I can click that and do 2 bodies. I don't know. Do you guys want to see how to do? I'll leave the second one in. It won't hurt anything. It'll be a better cam. So that's it for this tab. I don't have any fixtures like a clamp or a vise or anything, so I'm just using double-sided tape. The fixture would let you, if you had those in your Fusion 360 model, you can click fixture and then click on those, and it will actually recognize that's a vise or that's a clamp or whatever. Don't mill that thing, or at least give an alert that, hey, I'm your tool path is going to cut through your fixture. So here's the stock tab. By default, it does this relative box size. The only thing I can really think that's useful for is, I don't know, I'm struggling with it. Like if you had a big, huge piece of plywood and you're or MDF and you were cutting shapes out of it randomly here and there. But even then, you can specify a stock box size. It's still, I don't know why they don't default it there. So my poplar that I had is 15.5 inches long. It is 3.5 inches deep, and it is 0.75 inches high. I didn't do my model that tall because I goofed up tonight, but that's okay. We'll pretend this is what I wanted to do. Round up, etc., etc. And do I really want my models in the center? Not really. I want to offset them ½ inch from the left. I don't want to cut right into the center of my piece of poplar. I want to preserve that right side. Maybe I can get a second box out of it. So I just changed that offset from the left side and moved them over. Let's leave a ½ inch. Okay. And that's really kind of it for the setup. You can go back and edit that more. There's this post-process thing. You don't have to worry about that at all. We can deal with that later. So all the setup really does is defines what you're going to cut out and what you're going to cut it out of. So now I have to decide how I'm going to cut this. Well, since I so cleverly made my model shorter than it should have been, and I'm doing a ½ inch tall box instead of a 3/4 inch tall box, I'm going to start with a 2D face. So a lot of the things that we as Shapeoko users will use are going to be in this 2D, this top part of the menu here. Adaptive clearing, pockets, face, contour, slot, and trace. These are, and engrave. These are the ones that I think we'll use a lot. Maybe 2D chamfer, but really those there. And then if you use a ball and mill, that's when you get into this 3D adaptive. But this model's not going to need anything 3D. But that's the difference between the two. So 2D is going to be that step down square look that I have going here. 3D is where you use a ball and mill and you do the nice rounded stuff. So that's kind of the guide to when you're going to switch between these two menus. So I could use a 2D face operation here. I could use a 2D adaptive operation. It really doesn't matter. But let's say I want to do a 2D face, and I want to face it down to this level. I went a little too fast there. I click 2D face. First, I should select a tool. Just so you guys know, I don't know if you guys have seen his videos, but if you Google, I'll put his name here, Winston Moy. Go to his YouTube channel. And he has all kinds of good videos. And I asked him recently if he's a Shapeoko user. He uses a lot of the same stuff as we do. He uses the obviously Shapeoko 3. I think his is an XL, but he has Carbide 3D's tools, and so I asked him if he would export his tool library, and he did so. And he made a video on it on how to import his tool library into yours, and this is what it looks like once you've imported it. And so you can go right in here and choose the number 201 Carbide 3D square end mill. He's already defined it for us. Actually, if I go in and edit that tool, you can see he's gone in and told it has 3 flutes. It's 2.5 inches long. There's 0.75 inch flute length. He's done all of that for us already. So if you follow his video and import his tool library, it's a huge time saver. And I'm going to select that tool. When you select a tool from your library, it moves it up into that document that you're actively working on. So I have, get rid of vendors and cloud and all of this. I have my local library of all my tools, which are really Winston's, other than this 1-inch face mill. And once I've said I'm using that in a document, it puts it up into that document. So I'm going to use that tool. This coolant thing really doesn't matter. And then here's all your feeds and speeds, which you can get from Carbide 3D's site on what you're going to use. Spindle speed doesn't do a darn thing. You can set it to whatever you want, unless you have a VFD or a Super PID or something like that. You can set that to anything. It doesn't do anything for default Shapeoko. The rest of it, I'm not going to try and advise on feeds and speeds. I did get a program, I'll put it over here, called GWizard. This is where I get my feeds and speeds from. If you've not heard of this program, it's pretty cool. I'll show you how I have my Shapeoko defined, softwood with a carbide end mill, tool diameter, number of flutes, stick out, and I told it I want a 0.15 inch depth of cut. It gave me a 0.1021, or I'm going to round it to 0.1 inch cut width. And then it tells me here's my RPM, my feed rate, plunge, helix, and ramp. So it defines all those for you. It's a pretty neat program called GWizard. It's not cheap, unfortunately, not free like Fusion 360. But I would go through and plug those in. The ones of these. So here's the thing I wish somebody had highlighted for me. The things on this window that matter. We don't care about spindle speed. I can set that to 19,000 RPM. It doesn't change anything because Fusion 360 is going to send that command to the gerbil controller on the Shapeoko, and there's nothing there to control. It's not going to do a darn thing. The ones that matter, the only things that matter on this window are your cutting feed rate. You're going to set that. GWizard told me to set it to 100 inches per minute. I'm going to type in 100 there. I'm going to take that. I'm going to copy it. I might need a different lead in, lead out. It might be 50 inches per minute on the lead in, 50 inches per minute on the lead out. I'm going to take that from GWizard. I'm going to set the ramp feed rate. The ramp feed rate was 66 inches per minute, and the plunge feed rate was 33 inches per minute. Those are the ones we care about. There we go. The cutting feed rate, lead in, lead out, ramp, and plunge. Those are your feeds. Those are the ones that matter. Your spindle speed, you're going to set it to whatever Carbide 3D says or whatever, but it really doesn't do anything. You have to manually set your spindle, obviously. Those are the ones that matter here. So that's it for the first tab. Geometry. Well, I'm going to face down my objects here, since this is a face operation. I'm going to select both of them. I've never done a face operation with two things. but I'm going to say both of them. So I just click that outside line of the top, since face is going to cut it down to wherever I click. You have this heights thing. The only thing that really matters there at this point is the retract height. You just want to make sure that's going to go high enough to clear anything. Basically, if you turn your model, if you click the front view of your model and look across, the important thing is that all of those are at least as high as your model or any fixtures or clamps or anything that your end mill might move over. If you have a clamp or something that's a 1/2 inch tall, you might need to set your retract height higher so that when it pulls that end mill up, it'll move over the top of your clamps. For the most part, honestly, I've left all of these alone because I'm not clamping down my equipment or my parts. I'm not having to worry about that yet. So at this point, those are all fine. Every once in a while, there's a reason to adjust the top or bottom if you want to leave some stock underneath or something like that. But really, I think these are, for the stuff that I'm doing as a beginner, those are fine. Passes. This is where you set, okay, this is where you say, here's how many times I want to go across this. Well, the important thing there is my step over. And on anything in the cam side of Fusion 360, if you just hover your mouse over it, it gives you a nice little picture of all the detail of that item. And step over is how far across we want that cutter, how wide of a cut we want it to do each time. I know from my previous G-Wizard thing, it said 0.1 inch step over. Again, so I'm in this case taking that from right here in G-Wizard. That's my cut width. And I want to do multiple depths, and I want to make sure I don't go over 0.15 in depth. And I don't know why multiple depths is not a default check. I'm going to stress this here. If you're new to Fusion 360 and CAM, this confused me for a while. So you have your cut width and your cut depth. This is where they're set, is in the passes tab. And make sure if you don't set a multiple depths, it's going to run that end mill all the way through the stock as far as it needs to go to complete that action. So it would, take as big of a bite as it possibly could to get down to the selected face. So now I'm going to say okay, and it just went through and generated this facing operation for me. Now facing always goes to the same height, so it's going to face it just like that. Maybe I don't want that. Maybe I want it to face this one to its max height, and on this left one, I want it to face it all the way down to the object. So I'm going to say duplicate. I don't have to redo all of this. I can edit this one. And on that first, this tab where I have the contours, I can just select this one, say okay. I can right click on this one, go back here, and select just this contour and say okay. And it's still going to do that. It's interesting. So apparently face will only go down, even if you have two operations, it'll only go down to the highest model. That's fine. So I'll get rid of the second one and just edit this. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to cut the stock down to that height. Anytime I do an operation, immediately after, I come up here and I simulate. I click on setup first, I click simulate, I hit play, and it will show me what it's going to do. There we go. Notice it didn't take anything out of this back side. That happened to me once before on a facing operation. Gotta remember how I fixed that. I don't know how I fixed that. Okay. Anyway, so that's how we set up a facing operation. I'm going to get rid of that. I didn't use a facing operation last night, and I'm not going to use it here. But that would cut your stock down to a nice clean face. What I would prefer to use, or what I did use, is a 2D adaptive clear. And so in 2D adaptive, it's the same set of steps. I'm going to choose a tool. It's already in my document. That doesn't matter. I would set my feeds and speeds, so I'd go through here again and type in my 100 millimeter or 100 inches per minute. Copy that down through. I'm going to go through all that again. And then my pocket selection. So I'm just going to select the pockets I want it to cut, and I'm going to select here and here, here. I'm going to leave my heights alone, set my passes, multiple depths. I want to do 0.15 roughing step down. The stock to leave is interesting. It's how much you want to leave on the sides or the bottom in order to clean it up later. I leave some axial or some radial stock around the sides. I don't leave any axial stock at the bottom because I like the kind of, it leaves a circular swirl pattern. It's kind of cool to me. And this is again something I think Fusion 360 is a little confusing about. It calls it optimal load. This is your cut width. So it's already set to 0.1. That's what I want it to be. But that I wish these were named a little bit clearer. Maximum roughing step down, that's your cut depth. Optimal load is your cut width. Tolerance is how close you want it to follow that shape. And again, if you hover over each of these things, it makes gives a nice description. Important thing to point out: this direction, climb versus conventional milling. It's a term for if you're cutting into the wood. To the left is well, you can see the picture. That's another thing I do appreciate that GWizard does, is it tells me for each feed and speed if I should use climb milling or if I should use conventional milling. So that's been a handy thing because I really don't know when you would use one or the other. I just kind of follow what GWizard's telling me. So climb milling, and then here's this linking tab. This is stuff for how you want it to do different operations as it goes from one operation to the next. What do you want it to do? The only thing I will say is you don't really have to do much here other than make sure it's on helix and not plunge. Plunge is basically like a drill bit. It goes straight down. Helix, I'll show you in the simulation. It's pretty cool. It ramps itself down. If you order by depth, it's going to, that's the default, I believe. But order by area. I found this out last night. If you say order by area, it's going to cut one model and then the other, or one pocket and then the other. And it's going to go all the way down to the bottom of that pocket before it moves on to the next one. If you do order, if you leave this unchecked, it'll do a little bit from one, retract, move over, do a little bit from the other, and it bounces back and forth. It cost me about 12 minutes in a single job last night of watching it retract and bounce back and forth. Checking that box saved literally 12 minutes. So I'm going to say okay there, and it's going to generate a tool path. And I'm going to click on setup now and say simulate, hit play. And this little slider here, if you can see it, speeds things up, reverses, so I just drag it to the right and speed it up and see what it's going to cut out. So that's going to cut out the inside of my boxes for me. It's pretty cool. Nice way to quickly clear that space. I might want to go ahead and actually, let's see here. So if I do that simulation again, you can click on stock to show the stock. You can see it's not cutting that top edge for me. So I might want to, and I do, want to go in and on the geometry, I'm just going to add that outer edge. I'm not going to do it for that one. I'm going to make sure it does it for this one. Actually, I just saw I made a mistake there. Pretty key thing. So you can see when I click this red arrow, it flips that around and the blue area goes. If I left it this way, it would cut that whole 15.5-inch board down to that height using an adaptive clear. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to clear my model to that height. So by clicking that red arrow, it just flips which side of the line I selected I'm on. Say okay. And to be clear, there are a million ways to do this, and I'm sure there are more correct ways than I know as a new person on this, but these do work. I've been using them, so this has been an effective way for me to go. So there we go. We've cleared our boxes that far in. The next thing I would do is a 2D contour. So the adaptive doesn't follow those walls real close. It doesn't give you a real nice finish, especially because I did leave that stock to leave, and I really recommend doing that. Think of a contour as kind of a finishing pass for the adaptive. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. It's already selected my tool for me. It's going to assume I don't want to change a tool. It'll even carry over my feed and speed from the previous adaptive I did. So that information would stay. Make sure to set that in your first tool before you create more, and it'll save you a lot of typing later. For my geometry here, I'm going to use this particular contour to clear out those same areas as a finishing pass. So I'm just going to select those same 3 interior steps. I don't need to do anything with stock contours. That's a way to kind of contain them inside of your stock. I'm not going to leave any work holding tabs at this point. Rest machining is keeping, I don't know, it's something with your previous jobs. I'm not going to pretend I know everything about all of these yet because I'm fairly new to this as well. Again, shouldn't need to worry about your heights for this. Passes, same thing. Tolerance, don't worry about it. It's at a good default. Klein milling or conventional, use whatever G-Wizard or whatever your tool says to use for your material. Most of this really doesn't matter. I do think you should slow down your finishing feed rate, and I used G-Wizard to come up with that number. you may want some roughing passes. So that's just saying, don't go in and clean that up in one shot. I want to do two on it or whatever. This is where you would define that. We're cutting it down close enough with the adaptive. We don't need that. Multiple depths, we don't need that. We've already cut to the depth we're going to cut out. We just need that finishing contour. Stock to leave. The point of this is to clean it up, so we don't need that. Smoothing, I haven't noticed that really does much. I guess we can look at the tooltip. Yeah, that should be taken care of by the tolerance. And feed optimization doesn't really, yeah, I haven't messed with that. So really that's it for a cleanup contour. You can pretty much just choose your things you want to clean up and hit go. And if we simulate and we can jump to the next operation, it's cut, and here's our contours. It's gonna pass along that inner rim, it's gonna go along the bottom, and it's just cleaning up those walls. Cool. And now we need to go around the outside of it and clean that up. So I'm gonna do a 2D contour, and I'm gonna do the same thing here. So again, feeds and speeds carried over. Geometry, I'm going to select the bottom of the outside of this model. I'm going to select this lip, and I'm going to select the bottom of this. Now, the problem I'm going to run into on this contour, actually, I'm going to divide this up into two operations. I'm going to do two contours. I'm going to do this first. The problem I would run into if I just let this go is it's going to cut. There's a whole lot of wood left there from my adaptives around the exterior of these. There's a really good video by NYC CNC that goes through the different ways of clearing the outside of a model and separating it. The option I'm going to use here is one that they gave. You could do multiple depths, but again, it's going to have to plunge a little bit to get into those. I like the ramp. The ramp is really cool. So if you, again, all I've done so far is I've said I want to do a contour. I chose that one thing, and now I clicked ramp, and it says I'm going to angle down at 2 degrees. I'm going to say OK. And if I simulate and hit play and skip that one, that's our adaptive. It's not letting me skip nicely. Oh, I forgot to choose setup. So it's done the adaptive, it does the other contours. Here's that outside contour, and it's going to slowly ramp its way down to that line. You can see it's going at a very slight angle and just winding its way down around. And we'll cut that out. Now it left a wall there, which means I've left stock to leave on. So let me fix that. I didn't leave stock to leave on. Oh, that's funny. There's just a little bit of stock left from my adaptive there. So I'm going to try adding a contour to that to take care of that. So here's the, it's clearing the walls on the second box, and now it's doing this ramped. See if it takes care of it. No, it's still, you guys see what I'm talking about? It still left that there. That's funny. So adding these didn't take care of that. That is really funny. I'm going to try adding just a separate contour, geometry, there and there. I'm not going to click anything else. I'm going to drag it up in the timeline. I can reorganize things, so it's going to happen right there. And I'm going to click setup and simulate. Play. It's going to do, nope. That is really funny. I'm going to have to figure out why that is not getting rid of that. And I'd hate to do an adaptive for it, but I will do it. I do an adaptive from there to there. Flip that inside. I come over here and uncheck stock to leave. Nope. So if you ever generate a toolpath and it comes up with this little warning thing, you can click on it. It almost always says empty toolpath. It means you defined something and it tried to generate a toolpath and said, nope, there's nothing there. I'm not sure how to properly get rid of that. Let's do this. Let's see. Is that part of my model, or is that, or not part of my model? Is that? So that's on the inner wall. And it's just leaving that outer little bit there. Okay. Here's how I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to create a 2D adaptive. I'm going to tell it the geometry is this. I'm going to come over here and uncheck stock to leave. I'm going to say OK. Learning as we go. Edit. Actually, I'm going to get rid of that. Okay. So I just added an adaptive that'll run on that first pass. Is that going to do it? I'm going to simulate just that adaptive and see what it gives me. So if I run the whole thing, I can simulate, and a lot of times I just skip all the way to the end. Okay, that's hilarious. I got rid of all of it but the very corners where the adaptive didn't get to because of the tolerances. Huh. You would think I'd be able to get rid of that easier than this. I mean, okay, fine. Do a 2D face along that. We'll put it after the adaptive. Sorry, folks, I'm learning as I'm going here. This is kind of different than I did last night. Should have really done it the same. There we go. So it's a clunky way to do it. I don't know why it was leaving that little gap there, but that got rid of it. Back to where I was. This is my so I want to do a 2D contour that will trace along the outside here, here, and here. And I'm going to go over and I'm going to tell it to ramp. So kind of back to where I was before. And now if I click Setup and Simulate and play, it's going to ramp through and it's going to cut it all out other than it has some stock to leave in the ramp or in that contour. Close. So we can edit this, go back. Zero, zero. I'm going to simulate just that ramp and make sure it's going all the way down through. Why is that not cutting through my stock? Oh, this is all the way back in my setup. I'll bet you I didn't tell it. Yeah. I want to offset from the bottom 0 inches. That'll help. So now my models weren't quite on the bottom. So you can see this is actually a good example here. Since I changed where they were located in my stock, I got all these exclamation points. You can right click and say generate toolpath, and it will regenerate them all. So now if I click setup and click simulate, play, I'm just going to jump all the way to the end. I've cut out my my box, and that would theoretically run and complete. I need to do the face operation on this one too. That adaptive is leaving out some material, so I'm going to add a 2D face operation. I'm going to just select that contour. Again, really shouldn't need to do much else. Say OK. Drag it up in the tool chain and simulate one more time. We can watch it play through all of this here. So there we go. It didn't cut it down. Why didn't it cut it? Oh, because face is going to go to the top of the model. And I probably can't make that. I'm going to have to figure out why that won't cut all the way down when I do a pocket or anything. Because it really seems like if I do a 2D pocket and I tell it don't leave any stock, that should do it. Sorry, this is a little different situation than I had last night. A little different setup. And it's leaving a little bit on the corners. Just Oh, I know an easy way to fix this. So when I do this pocket, I can tell it stock to leave. I don't know why I didn't think of this earlier. I want it to go right to that face. I can tell it just take off 2/100ths of an inch. Oh, I can even make it 1/100th of an inch past the edge of that area. Should have thought of that earlier. I apologize. Now if I simulate, run it all the way to the end, that's gone. And that's a cleaner way to do it than the face operation. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and just delete that. And I'm going to edit this one, and I'm going to do that same thing on this geometry because it's a cleaner way to do it. Okay. No passes. It doesn't want me to link those. I'm going to duplicate that. That's this one. Edit. And select that. Select that. Say okay. Oh. I don't even think I need stock contours checked. I should uncheck that. Oops. Simulate. So there we go. So just 2D adaptives, a couple pockets, and some contours, and I'm done. This would run if I'm using double-sided tape and I'm careful and these corners don't fly off. That's all well and good. And this would come up with a nice successful box. I really believe it would. But let's say I want to make sure my work doesn't fly off here. What I can do is take this last contour, the one that cuts it out. I can edit it, and I can go to, if I find it, tabs. And I can say place some tabs, some work holding tabs. You can tell it what width, what shape, what height, what distance you want them at, or you can say I want them at points. I want one here and here. I only want them on these sides. And just like that, I have 4 tabs that'll hold these boxes down to my work as I go. Now, obviously, this one on this end doesn't make sense if I'm cutting it all out, but that's a nice little option. The other thing I really like, if you edit this contour, is you can say I want to do some roughing passes, and it will do more steps. I really recommend doing this. It won't do it all in one ramp. It will ramp outside of your part, do a pass, and then it will do a second pass closer. If you see the tool paths, it has one here, one on the outside, and then one a little closer to the inside there. So that'll give you a nicer surface finish. That's the high level of cutting out a box. So we've gone through the CAD and creating the box. We've gone through and cut it out. The nice thing is if you did go back and change something in the model view, say I realized, and this is what I realized last night, is this offset needs to be slightly shrunk here. If if I make them so they fit too tightly, they're not going to fit together. You can go in, you can sketch on that surface. I'm going to sketch another offset from this, I'm going to go negative 0.01 inch or 0.02 inches. Just enough to give it, some clearance between the top and the bottom of the box. Say OK. I'm going to select, I'm just zooming in and select that, and I'm going to extrude that down to, this object. Didn't do it right. To there. Yeah, it didn't want to work. Okay. I'll just do distance. Negative 0.125. It guessed how far. Say okay. So now I've cut that side down just a little bit. So it's not 1/8 of an inch anymore. It's 2/100ths less. You can see it's 0.105 inches. Say close. Well, I've just changed my model. If I go back into the cam side, I don't have to go through and change any of those selections or anything. You just right click and generate toolpath, and it'll go through and recreate them for you. Any it has errors on, you right click. The error is going to be the geometry is missing. So you can select that geometry that's no longer there. And say delete. And then select the one you want. Make sure the arrow faces the right way. Say OK. I'm going to need to do that on each one of these. Delete. Flip the arrow. OK. Edit. Geometry. Delete. Flip the arrow. Oh wait, that's not where that was. That's for this. And now if I go and run that, just jump to the end. There's my boxes. Okay, so if you guys are interested, I'll go ahead and real quick show you how to do something a little more common maybe, and that's create a sign. And that's by importing an SVG. So this is probably a little closer to what Carbide Create is like. I would like to translate the workflow from Carbide Create for you, except I've never used it. So I'm going to kind of wing it here as far as getting the workload close. So again, back to my model view, I'm going to sketch my model. I'm going to do a 12-inch or I'll do a 6-inch by 6-inch sign. So first thing, I want to make sure I'm in inch mode. I'm going to sketch on that plane. I'm going to draw a rectangle. Again, I don't care how big I initially draw it because I like to use dimensions. And I'm going to hit 6 inches. Click these two. And I'm going to hit 6 inches again. I have a 6-inch on the side rectangle. This is, representing some piece of wood or something I have that is a 1/2 inch thick. So here's what I'm going to use for my sign. Very similar to how I started the last one. What you would now do is I want to insert a drawing, an SVG, onto that. When you do an insert for SVG, you're going to pick a face of your model. So I just click the top of my sign, and it'll bring up this window to select your SVG file. And I have a couple of SVGs here. I have a nice one of, I don't want to use that one. That one I remember had some problems. This is a Star Wars one. So I'm going to say OK, select that, and it brings up this giant SVG because of course it's not scaled anywhere close to my 6-inch model. So I'm just grabbing this little triangle here, and I can rescale it how I want. And I can click that point and drag it where I want. So I'm going to drag it over and scale it to the size of what I would want on my sign. And maybe I want it something like this. And say OK. Now, obviously, I didn't center that very well. I would hope I would do a better job if I were really making this. You can sketch text onto a plane. So Fusion 360 does occasionally decide that up is the other direction. So you just drag that wherever you want it on your sign and click your font. So you can do probably fairly similar to what you're doing in Carbide Create right onto that surface. So at this point, I have this sketch here. I'm going to get rid of the text. So I've made this sketch that's going to be my sign. Maybe I have some text or whatever else. You can click on the material in that text just like a sketch you had created. So when you import an SVG, it actually divides it up into all these colors. And if you'll notice, the lines for the SVG are green. Green means they're locked. Green line is locked. And what's interesting about that is you can actually select those lines and choose fix, unfix over here. You can unfix that line, which would let you modify it or move it around. It's only grabbing arcs. So you can see that one little arc is in blue now when I hover over it just right. There is a way, I believe it's by selecting Alt. Yeah. Maybe. There's a way, there's a trick in one of the NYC CNC videos to grabbing more of it. But you could go through and unfix those. If you wanted to delete some lines, that's what you're going to need to do. Doesn't really matter for this. So I'm just going to undo those. So I'm going to select the area of my SVG I want to carve out, and I'm going to do -0.10. You can see I accidentally did a positive, so it made it a extrusion up instead of down. I can just edit that extrusion and type a negative there. Oh, maybe. Oh, I have to switch it to cut because I did it later. Okay, so now you have your SVG and you've cut into your sign just like you would in Carbide Create or whatever else. Or maybe you have, and I'll do this real quick. Maybe you've just created a shape, a spline, or you've just freehand drawn on your. You have some logo that you want to recreate. That's just a freehand line. You can have just a line there. And I know that's something that sometimes you do in Carbide Create is you have just these lines that you want to trace. We're going to do a setup again. Switched over to cam setup, model orientation. Going to select the top for my Z. I'm going to click the right face for my X. And I'm going to select my lower left corner for my stock box point. For my stock, I'm carving this into something that's already of a known size that matches my my selection, so I'm going to set that to 0. Maybe there's some stock on the top that you're going to face off or not. Same kind of operations as before. In this case, I'm pretending, I'm just carving this into something, so I don't need any offsets or anything. Okay. And now I'm going to do the same kind of process as I did before. I can do a 2D adaptive inside of this area. Now, the thing about 2D adaptive when you're clearing a pocket like this is you need to select the area to keep it inside of. It's very unaware of, if I just say OK, well, first of all, I have to select a tool. If I just say OK, actually, it did a good job that time. I think, no, it didn't. If I simulate that, so I tell it, here's, show me my stock, and I hit simulate, it's going to start cutting in. It's just going to cut that whole area out. If I turn off my model, so I'm not seeing my model, it cut out most of that inside pocket and got rid of a lot of detail. So I need to go edit this, turn my model back on, go to geometry, and you have to select each of those islands and protect them. And again, watch where these red arrows are. If that red arrow shows up showing inside the island, you need to flip it to the outside. And if you're not sure if it looks like it's correct, you can just simulate it and check. And then again, the same kind of options as before. We're not worried about our heights. Our passes, you want to make sure that chip load, that optimal load, is your step over value. So 0.1 was my step over value. I don't want any axial stock to leave. I only want some radial stock to leave. And multiple depths. I, at this point, after a recent experience, am going to always tell it multiple depths. Even if the multiple depths is taller than the area I'm cutting, I'm going to go ahead and tell it anyway, because there's no harm in doing it. If that's greater than the area you're cutting, it's going to ignore it. If it's not, it'll catch it for you. And then linking, again, the ramp type, helix, not plunge, and say OK. So you can tell after you get used to those tabs, most of it, the defaults are really pretty good in Fusion 360. And it's pretty smart about what it wants there. Now I can see this toolpath is going to have some problems for me. The 1/4-inch cutter in mill is pretty big for this operation that's trying to do these real little helix swirls into the pocket and then barely cutting anything. So this isn't going to be a great fit. I'm going to go ahead and edit that, and I can select the tool, go to my library, and I will choose my number 102 1/8-inch square end mill. Again, Winston Moy has those defined. I would pull up GWizard now, just to show that workflow a little bit. I know this isn't supposed to be about GWizard, but I do like the program. So 1.25, and it's 3/4-inch stick out. And it will generate feeds and speeds. Now, it wants a very fast RPM there. But that's with pretty big cut width, actually. So my depth of cut is probably going to be a 0.1. Click my cut width. So it has a 0.9 cut width and a 0.1 cut depth. So then I would copy those in for the passes. So that was 0.09. And on my depths, I would do a 0.1. and say OK. And now it'll generate for a 1/8 inch end mill instead of that big 1/4 inch for this. Well, this is generating. Anybody have any questions? I've gone pretty fast through a lot of this, it feels like, but I'm not hearing any complaints. Wow, this is really working my PC to come up with this this path here. I haven't actually cut this pattern out of anything yet. I did. Actually, no, I did. I cut it out of a coaster. It didn't take this long. It was only a 4-inch coaster, but that's. If we zoom in there, that is a lot of little tiny cuts. It's doing a single pass at full depth, it looks like. Wondering if I typoed something. One thing that's kind of interesting here, you can see on the heights, the one height that is kind of funny is it will start doing the helix ramp in from the ramp height is one of the settings. That looks like a lot more passes than I would expect. Did I type this wrong? Oh, that's why. I'm in millimeters and not inches. It defaulted to millimeters on me and I forgot to change it. This will make a lot more sense. Passes, and I'm going to just delete this and start over. It's trying to carry over all my settings from millimeters to the adaptive. Select my geometries. Select my end mill. So I'll go ahead and stick with that 1/8. Passes. Optimal load 0.0. And multiple depths 0.1. This should generate a lot faster. Hey, that looks more like what I would expect. So you can see the adaptive isn't even trying this outer slot. It's right at the 1/8 inch radius, so there's not enough stock to leave. But I can simulate that and see it cuts that out. And then I would go ahead and do a 2D contour. And the same process here. Select the same islands. And there's probably some shortcut for copying chains between the two. Do a roughing pass and multiple depths and make sure it has a maximum roughing step down of my maximum step, which is 0.1. Actually, that won't matter. It will on the outside. Okay. Now if I simulate the whole thing, crank the speed up, and it's cutting right to the lines on everything. It looks like in my adaptive. I like the simulate because it highlights these kind of things. I left a little axial stock to leave in the adaptive, and I shouldn't have. So I will turn that off. And there we go. Now I have a nice, I don't know why my play button got stuck on down there. It's going to go through and cut it out. And one thing I didn't show earlier, I probably should have, very nice feature here is you can go to statistics and it'll actually tell you how long this cut's going to take. So we're at 5 minutes and 55 seconds. And it tells you how many inches long the cut is. I don't know if that's real helpful or not, but the machining time is very, very useful. Now, if you have something like this line we said is going to be our fancy logo. Obviously, I'm not an artist. You can go in and do an engrave or a trace, and those will follow that line. So if you're doing an engrave, this is where you're going to use your V cutter, and you're going to go in and select your tool, library, and does he have one defined? I don't have a V-shaped. There we go, a chamfer mill. Oh no, that's my drag engraver. That's not going to do it. All flat. What's he got? There we go. So these must be the V-shaped cutters from in mills from Carbide 3D. So here's a 90-degree, and then you're gonna say geometry, and you're gonna choose what you want it to cut. Contour selection. Should be able to select that. Nope. Okay. Just going to do an offset, and I'm going to quickly connect these. Let's do. Come on. Just draw a line between them. So I made a little contour out of that instead of a line. Sorry, I'm not the artistic type. I'm more the functional type of CAD CAM. So 2D engrave. It's going to let me select that. There we go. So now it'll let me select it, and this is where you're going to set your heights, tolerances, step angle, and all that. Oh yeah, I got to select my 90-degree. Okay. Wonder if I need to. I just extruded that down 1/10 of a millimeter. Try making sure I select the bottom of that. Select that tool. Huh. Okay, so obviously I haven't done engraving yet, but that's where the tool is. Maybe we can get somebody on the users group to chime in and and explain how engraving actually works. Tool path not supported for the given tool in settings. Yeah, it won't let me save that, so I'm doing something wrong. Wonder if I can do it like this. Nope. So sorry, I'm just I am still waiting on my VBIT. It did not arrive yet, so I've not been able to do those kind of those cuts yet. I was hoping I could show you. So hopefully this is a little bit about how to do stuff. Again, if you're going to, I can show you this. I've done this. Let's say, you've got this sign and you decide, well, I do want to go through and round these corners off. You can say modify, fillet, bring those in a 1/4 inch, say OK. Now I've got a nice rounded plaque. Go back to cam. I need to regenerate my tool paths. That's no problem. And now I would use for that a 2D. Well, I'll go ahead and do a 2D adaptive. If I did a 2D adaptive, it's got the 1/8 end mill selected. That's fine. If I do that geometry and I select that top line and this bottom line to say I want to do everything in between those, that arrow is incorrect. And this arrow, that arrow is correct. There we go. So I've selected everything between those. I say OK. It'll generate a 2D adaptive. But it's not going to do a very good job. It's gonna do, if I simulate that run, that's definitely not a good job. It did the opposite of what I want. But I had the right chains. It may just be that the 2D adaptive can't even figure out the geometry I'm trying to tell it here, because that's an odd, yeah, it's going to clear the same thing. Yeah. So at any rate, 2D adaptive is the wrong strategy for that clear. So I'm going to delete that. What you can do is a 3D contour. And you can select, it's got my tool selected. Actually, I want to go to the tool and I want to select, this is where you would use a ball cutter. Again, I said the 3D stuff, you want to use the ball nose. And then for contours, for geometry, I want to select the 2 lines I want to be in between. So 3D gives you these nice green lines there. And I want to come over here to my settings, and I want to tell it my step down direction, diameter, where is it? Let's just try it with the defaults here and see what this gives us. So simulate it. Say go. This is where it's going to give a much nicer curved angle, and you can see it's going to leave a little bit of sanding to do, and it'll show you that. And you can actually get that very smooth through the contour. If you edit that, there is a step down I found the other day. if you change this minimum shallow step down, you can get a very smooth smooth surface out of that. And I actually got one that was very nice. I can post it in the comments if it's helpful. But maybe that's not it. What I can do, it's actually on. Did I save it? I didn't save it. Net figures. I didn't save my 3D contour. Maybe it was maximum step down. Let's try 0, 1 for maximum step down. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. So you can see it's got a lot more paths generated, and if I simulate that, it's going to smooth it out even more. And you can keep refining that down. So that's how you use your ball cutter to do a nice smooth 3D contour, and you can do that on any 3D shape. So the 3D, it's a very similar tool paths, contour, adaptive clearing, the same concepts, just you use the ball nose cutter for those. At this point, that's everything I had thought to go over. I can show you more tips and tricks. I can show you how to use the drag knife, that kind of thing. I've talked for a long time here. I don't know, really, are there any questions at all? Anything that you've looked at in Fusion or anything that I've done that didn't make sense that it would help to see again? I can show you. Here's the coaster sets I did. These were done out of 1/4" poplar. For this, I did an adaptive for each of the coasters to clear the bulk of the material. I did a contour then for each of the coasters to go through and clean up the contours. Then I did the outer contour and I spiraled down. These were held down with tape, so I didn't need any tabs. And I did in those outer contours, I did a both multiple depth and I did roughing passes. So when it was done getting to the maximum depth, it did a final pass right against the outside edge and really cleaned them up nice. They came out very nice, especially for just being poplar. So that worked pretty well. Here, like I said, I did cut the box before. I wasn't completely off base on it. This is how I did the boxes. I used a little bit more advanced of a way to clear the material outside the box. I used an adaptive with an offset sketch. So I did an adaptive clear between the outside of the box and the outside of the sketch instead of doing that ramped contour. And then I did a final contour pass. So you can see here's the adaptive, and it kind of spiraled around the outside of the box. So it wasn't taking big, chunks with the cutter, with the end mill. And it spiraled its way down. And then I did some final contour passes to clean up those walls of the boxes. Same kind of idea there. So I did 2 passes after the adaptive. And then the other one I've done is I post the Stranger Things sign that I did. I used a drag cutter for this. This was done, I used a SVG. So if I switch over to the model view, and I look at what I did for a sketch, it is just a SVG inserted into a sketch. I then went into the cam view and selected a pocket operation, 2D pocket operation, and selected each of those pockets individually, and it is just using my my drag chamfer bit, and the trick is to go in and tell it your maximum step over. I'm in millimeters again. If I switch to inches, edit that. Now if I look, my maximum step over is 0.05 inches. So it's just a really shallow step over with that diamond tip drag cutter. The last thing I need to show before I call it a night is once you've generated all of this, you can select either an individual operation. So let's go back to our boxes here. You can select an individual operation, or you can select the setup. So if you want to break it down, if you're using multiple tools and you want to export each one individually, you can do that. You can grab 3 things. Whatever, you know, if I was doing these 3 with a 1/4 inch tool and my final 2 contours with a different 1/4 inch tool that was, you know, my nice shiny good finishing tool, you can select partials, or if you're doing it all with one tool, you can just select the whole setup. And this is how you export it. So you're gonna, first of all, before you export, I've heard if you don't switch to millimeter, you can have some weird results. The controller can crash. Click on your setup, or click on the operations you want to save. Once you're in millimeter mode, click on post-process. There's a lot of stuff in this window. We don't care about most of it. Select your Carbide 3D. Choose an output folder, just wherever you're going to save your items to. I don't worry about any of that program number. I do type in a comment just so I can find it later. By default, it's going to open the file in an editor. I'm not one to sit and read G-code for fun, so I uncheck that. You just hit post. Give it a name. And save. Copy that onto your computer that's at your CNC, or if your PC is the one connected to your CNC, load that file up in Carbide Motion and you're good to go. So the post-processing window, there's a lot of stuff there that really the only important thing is to make sure you're in the Carbide 3D and you know, save it to some file you can find, some location you can find, and post. And that's really it. Again, make sure you're in millimeter. I guess what happens is if you're in inches when you export, and I switch both my model and my my cam to millimeters, because I've read that if you export in inches, the decimal values can get very long and there can be rounding errors, and if the decimals are too long, it's like over 25 decimal places, Gerbil will hit that and crash. And if you switch to millimeters, that's less likely to or won't happen. It expects millimeters. So just a rounding thing that can happen with large G code. But that really sums it up. And yes, Chris, I agree with your comment. If I can do this, anybody can do this. It's once you get in that mentality of sketch, constrain, extrude, and then use those little modifiers like the fillets or the move the, you know, the things in this window. Draft can be handy. It's a little confusing, but it's just to add angles to things. You can do your chamfers right here and add chamfer angles to things. Once you get used to that kind of basic workflow, it gets really easy to do some pretty cool stuff. So hopefully this helps. I'm happy to do this again sometime if there's, clarification or whatever. If anybody has any questions, feel free to message me and let me know. I'd be happy to help. So thanks. Hope it was helpful. Everybody have a good night.